Right, this seems like a decent enough distance to draw them away. Hope that this is loud enough. And now back home. Wait a minute. Rosewood has a prison. Prisons usually have pretty big armories. Maybe if I... Oh, yep, you definitely heard it. So, if you're on channel 595, I guess you're here to listen to my update. Before we begin, a survivor heard my broadcast last week and was kind enough to leave me a tip about my base in the QZ. What's this? Gap under car. Yeah, I see. Check in. Oh man, I just... Oh, Jesus Christ! I'll be honest with you, I have no idea why I didn't expect the infected to crawl underneath the cars, so thank you, a fearless geek, for the tip. I don't know why you felt that you needed to use a nickname at the end of the world, but alright. Now let's get back on track and onto my update in the QZ. On day 6, or rather night 6, I wanted to reinforce my base now that I knew that infected could crawl underneath my defences, and after looting through most of the garages and sheds in the neighbourhood, I found enough to securely barricade myself in. With my base well fortified on all sides, I could now focus on my next big mission, preparing for a prison raid. Not knowing how any of this would go, I decided to fully suit up and prepare for whatever would get in my way. Feeling about as prepared as any QZ wanderer, I headed back upstairs for a power nap so as to not get tired or drowsy for my early morning scavenging mission. And so, in the early hours of day 7, I awoke full of energy and determination to take on my biggest run so far. My first objective was to finally break into the Rosewood Police Station Armory. Here I would grab any weapons, ammo or spare equipment that was left behind by Rosewood's finest. Objective 2 was to search the school library for any books that allowed me to make any more weapons or defences for my base, as well as a radio so I can communicate and listen to what's going on outside the QZ. I know it's probably poor taste to be looking for weapons in a school in America, but trust me when I say that these things have a way of righting themselves. I also happened to find myself another working car, which would make it easier for me to transport loot and materials back to my base. Rather than drive through town, I decided to take the long way around and see what the infected situation was like. I spotted what looked like a police officer, and since I was in need of a new holster, I decided to engage. Didn't even have a holster. Forget what you just saw. Pulling up to the station, I parked my car to the entrance that was closest to the armory. After entering the building, I only had to deal with a couple of infected who were pulling a night shift. One of which had a key, which meant I didn't have to spend most of my night breaking into the armory. I had been building up this armory like I was going to walk inside and leave with a bag full of firearms, so you can imagine my disappointment when I opened the lockers to find only ammo and weapon cleaning kits. To make things worse, the ammo was only for weapons that I didn't even have. The only thing that I could use was the 12 gauge, and we've all seen how good I am with that. So, with my first objective completed rather early, it was best to move on to objective 2, heading towards the school to grab any research and hopefully find a radio along the way. Pulling up to the school, I quickly made my way inside and began looking for any books or magazines that could help me. I couldn't stay for very long because a small group of infected had followed me inside, so I quickly turned to looting lockers instead. It turns out that this school does have a gun problem, but it was mostly the paint and BB variety. And now I'm suddenly getting flashbacks to Community. Running into a nearby classroom, I found a couple of books on armor reinforcement and some desks, but seeing as the infected were quickly closing in, I used a nearby window to escape. I also had a mod installed which made combat at night more rewarding, so if I were to fight against any threats, I'd at least get double the amount of experience for it. Once I was outside, I began sneaking to the next classroom where I broke inside and began checking desks. At first I couldn't find much, but then at the front of the class I found a journal on gunsmithing, which wasn't concerning at all, and in another a book on doomsday survival. I couldn't decide if these kids were either psychos or geniuses with all the amount of survival prepping materials they had. Either way, they were probably still alive today because of it. Apparently, the teachers were also in on it, because I found a book on homemade axes in the desk at the front. I'm starting to think that these kids got this material to protect themselves from the staff more than the upcoming apocalypse. Checking the lockers outside. See? I told you these things have a way of writing themselves. With enough antisocial research to make even the scary quiet kids uncomfortable, I decided to focus my energy on looking for a radio. I don't know why I thought that the lunchroom would have anything like that, but if a book on homemade weapons can be found in a teacher's desk, then maybe I can find a ham radio on a lunch lady's chip tray. From the amount of infected that were in here, I gathered that they must have been part of the breakfast club, and were mad when they found out that human flesh wasn't on the menu this morning. My not-so-stealthy entrance was noticed by a small group of infected, but I quickly dealt with them using my trusty shotgun. Using my trusty knife, I pushed and stabbed my way through the infected, not panicking at all. Another small group surprised me, so I saw it best to try and kite them into a more open area. It's here I switched to my trusty baton to help stun and knock down any infected to buy me some time to come up with a much better plan. I then quickly got overrun and suddenly remembered a strat that every Project Zomboid survivor has used when outmaneuvered by the undead, having the infected to climb over it and hitting them when they hit the ground. Yet again, my hopes for finding a holster were immediately crushed, and that whole fight was for nothing. By now I had grown tired of looting the school for serial killers, and thought it best to head home. Not before trying to redeem my ability to shoot things on a couple of infected on my way out. After embarrassing myself yet again, for the final time, and proving that Brits know nothing about shooting guns, I went back to my stereotypical roots and switched to a knife instead. Through there, I cleared my way through a couple more infected. And a small horde that had wandered in after hearing my terrible skills with a firearm. On my way out, I stole a flag, because I thought it looked cool, and took the principal's diploma because, with the amount of books on weapons I found in students' desks, they clearly failed these kids. I then fought my way out of the school for a final time. Getting home, I grabbed the bag of ammo from the boot and set it down aside. I also took the time to properly place the banner I stole outside. I think it looks nice. And then spent some time properly storing all of the loot I got into its appropriate storage. On the morning of day 8, I awoke to the sound of a helicopter passing by. I missed what it was blasting from its speakers, but nothing major happened, so I guessed that it was just a scouting mission. I decided to explore the Rosewood expansion, a map mod which I had downloaded, to look for any vehicles that had sirens on it for future plans to raid the prison armory. The Rosewood expansion was closer than I expected, as I found a large private estate and what looked to be some kind of youth club. Pulling up outside the youth club, I headed to the private estate first, as it was a smaller area, which meant that I wouldn't have to worry about any large groups of infected, surprisingly. Checking the garage and seeing that it was locked, I walked around the building for any ways to get inside. Entering through a broken window and into what looked like some kind of lounge area, I made my way to the garage. Inside, after finding a hammer and nails, I was suddenly struck with inspiration as I handcrafted the iconic zombie apocalypse weapon. I got a chance to test out my new toy on an infected, and was immediately hit with a sense of confidence as hard as I hit that infected lady. Heading towards the youth club, I managed to get a critical hit on an unsuspecting guy and crawled through an open window and began clearing the building one caved head in at a time. Behind the bar, I found what looked like some sort of board game club, where I found a D&D set on a nearby table. Being an avid fan of Critical Role, I couldn't just leave something like that behind for the infected to bleed all over, and I took the board game with me. There wasn't much else to take from the building, so I left through a window on the east side and got back to my car. Driving down the road, it was now clear to me why I had seen so few undead in the main part of Rosewood, as the streets of the expansion were littered with infected on most corners. I spotted a news van in the middle of the street, where I thought a large horde that was beginning to cluster in on my position. Inside the van was a ham radio, and after grabbing the radio from the back seat, it weighed too much to be carried on its own. So I dove back into my car and pulled away as quick as I could to get home. After searching for days, I finally had a radio and enough loot that I decided it was time to take on the predators. 30 minutes later, when the power was back on and wanting to capture more footage, I booted up Project Zomboid, only to find out that the save had been corrupted. I checked the game files, uninstalled and reinstalled the game, but there was no way for me to get back to that campaign. But this isn't where our journey will end. In the short time that I had uploaded that first Project Zomboid video, where I doubted I'd get any views, I somehow managed to get 1,300 people to click on my video. Some of which left comments saying that they enjoyed the animation, believe it or not, and that they wanted me to keep this up. So I did what any creator or Project Zomboid player would do when they lose a character. I loaded up a new world, named it, changed a few rules and set the date to day 9, picked my character, and started again.